to Mrs. G's Sewing Space. Today I'm showing you how to go about copying ready to wear. I'm using a simple dress that has no darts or anything complicated. In this video I'm using a large clear garbage bag that I have picked up at Home Depot. I found them in the section where you would find the paper bags to dispose of lawn clippings. I open the bag up and I lay the plastic on the front of my bodice. I start out using pins and then I switch to pattern weights to hold the plastic in place while I trace everything out. I use a blue Sharpie marker to trace the seam lines, and then I use a red Sharpie marker to make any corrections. Before unpinning, I make sure to write all the pertinent information on the plastic so it doesn't get lost. As you can see throughout this video, I am including seam allowances, but it is my recommendation to leave the seam allowances for last, especially if you're just learning, and you'll see why later in the video. So when I was doing this off the top of my head, just going along because I know how to do it when I decided to film it. But if you're just learning how to do something like this, don't add the seam allowances right now. You wait till the very end to do the seam allowances. Cut out the pattern and go on to the next piece. You're not cutting the pattern out on the seam lines or the pattern lines. You just cut around it so that you can have something to refer back to when it's time to create your paper pattern. The back is a bit wider than the front, and the shoulder seam lines are laying face down on the mat, so as I trace I need to take into account that I will have to flip the dress over to get the shoulder seam. I drew a line at the shoulder where the fabric is folded as a mark to where I would need to line up to copy the actual shoulder seam. Remember, leave the seam allowances out for now. I left the pins in the shoulders so I could flip and trace, and then I went back and retraced and cleaned up and made notes on the pattern. Next is the sleeve. For the sleeve, make sure that you mark the front and the back. The lines that go up over your shoulder will be different from the front and the back. They're not the same. I have the paper there so you can see what I'm doing. Now the skirt. I folded the skirt in half since I know I'll be laying the pattern piece on a folded edge to cut out the fabric. So the fabric will be folded in half and one of the edges of the pattern will be laid on top of it. So I will only cut out 3 ways and not 4. And I traced it the same way. I'm using the brown paper so you can see me add 4.5 inches length to the dress for my daughter. She doesn't like short skirts. At this point, I have a white stiff interfacing behind the plastic so you can see me truing the pattern. Now, truing means to make sure that your seam allowances, your length matches, your corners are correct, and that the pattern pieces match each other where they're supposed to. There's always going to be a little variable when you're creating the pattern, especially when you're copying it directly from ready to wear. And as you go throughout this video, you can see me and the differences going from copying it from the ready to wear onto the paper and then comparing the paper pieces to each other. I've folded the plastic in half and I'm matching the seams. This allows me to true the seam lines and to make corrections. And I'm using my red Sharpie to show my corrections. Now it's time to trace my corrected patterns onto paper.
One comes around one today. They don't see things the same. 2 over 2 out the door. There you have magic. One comes around one today. They don't see things the same.
Now it's time to trace my corrected patterns onto paper. I'm using paper from the painting section of Home Depot that painters would walk on to keep the paint off the carpet. It's a good, stiff paper that isn't flimsy like the sewing patterns that you get at Joann's, but it'll stand up to the test of time in multiple uses.
Things the same. Two walk like two out the door. Then you have magic. One comes around one today. They don't see things the same. Two walk like two out the door. Then you have magic. One comes around one today. They don't see things the same. Two walk like two out the door. Then you have magic.
I am using a tracing wheel that has spikes on it to mark the paper. The spikes will go through the plastic and put holes in the paper underneath it. You can't see the holes on the camera, but you can see them in person. And then I take a pencil and I go over those marks so that way I can see the pattern. I make sure to mark any notes and placements that is needed. So if I had a dress that had darts on it or any type of pockets or buttons, I would mark those as well. Once everything is drawn out, I compare the seam lines on each piece. As you can see, I mark adjustments to the shoulder line so that they match. Then I go on to the next pieces. Now I am lining up and comparing the waist, noting the difference and trimming it off, and using my measuring tape to confirm the correct length. Remember that the pattern pieces are only 1/4 of the whole, so you need to fold the tape in half for the full length, and you write it down so you don't forget it. I do the same at the shoulder. I'm checking my measurements from the pattern against the dress. You can see the pattern at the waist was 30 inches and the dress is 29 inches. Remember, 29 inches does not include seam allowances. That means my pattern is 29 inches plus a ½ inch for seam allowance on each pattern piece, so they fit correctly. I'm doing the same for the skirt, and now I'm flattening out my paper and truing the pattern by comparing the bodice pieces to the skirt. We want to make sure that everything fits right. And here we go for the sleeves. I'm using my red Sharpie to make the corrections. I realized that I needed to merge my seam allowances with the bottom of the sleeve. Always mark the front and back of your sleeve. Right now I'm walking the sleeve pattern around the armhole to make sure it fits. And then I make corrections. I have a notcher, which is like a hole punch. So I use my notcher to mark the paper pattern to the front and the back. So I do 2 notches for the back, I do 1 notch for the front, and then I also notch the pattern, the bodice pieces on the armhole about 2 inches in from the side seam. 2 notches for the back and a notch for the front. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.